The late afternoon sun slanted through the blinds of Martha Henderson's living room, a familiar and comforting sight. It illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny forgotten memories, each one a silent testament to the quiet, orderly life she now led. At 68, Martha's world had shrunk to the four walls of her modest Ohio home, a space she had once shared with her husband David. Now, it was filled only with the ghost of him. His worn, leather easy chair still held the faint impression of his frame, a permanent indentation of love and loss. His broad, easy smile beamed from a dozen silver frames on the mantelpiece, a constant, cheerful sentinel over her solitude. It was a peaceful existence, she told herself, but a profound loneliness hummed just beneath the surface, a constant companion to the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. That fragile peace was joyfully shattered by the sharp, cheerful ring of the doorbell. Her heart gave a little skip. It was her son Kevin and his new wife Tiffany. Kevin, her only child, was the bright, burning center of her universe, the living embodiment of her and David's love. Tiffany was new, a whirlwind of modern energy, perfectly coiffed and polished, with a smile that was quick and bright, but seemed to vanish the second you looked away. Martha felt a familiar, protective wariness, but she was determined to love her for Kevin's sake. She smoothed her apron and opened the door. "Mom!" Kevin enveloped her in a hug that felt both desperate and exuberant, lifting her slightly off her feet. "We have the most amazing news." "You're not moving to California, are you?" Martha teased, her heart thumping with a familiar mix of love and apprehension. That had been her secret fear ever since he'd married this ambitious girl from the city. "Better!" Tiffany chimed in, her voice a little too loud for the quiet room. She gracefully pulled a sleek tablet from an oversized designer purse. "We found it. The one. Our forever home." She tapped the screen with a perfectly manicured finger, and a picture of a handsome two-story colonial with tidy blue shutters and a sprawling front lawn appeared. It was in a leafy suburb called Maple Creek, just 40 minutes away. It was perfect. It had a big, fenced-in yard for the future grandchildren she dreamed of, and a welcoming front porch with a swing. Martha's heart swelled with a fierce maternal joy. This was everything she'd ever wanted for him: stability, beauty, a place to put down roots. They sat at her small, well-worn kitchen table, the scent of her freshly baked oatmeal cookies filling the air. As they ate, Kevin and Tiffany spun a glittering, intoxicating vision of the future. They described the house in vivid detail, painting a picture so real Martha could almost see it. "And the kitchen, Mom, you won't believe it," Kevin said, his eyes shining. "It has this huge island. We could all cook Thanksgiving dinner together." Tiffany jumped in. "And there's a master guest suite on the first floor, with its own bathroom. It would be Martha's room, of course. You could come and stay for weeks at a time." It was a beautiful, irresistible dream, and Martha wanted nothing more than to believe in every single word. Then, as if on cue, Kevin's expression grew serious. The brilliant smile faded, replaced by a look of earnest gravity. He reached across the table and took her hand, his own calloused from his construction job. "Mom, we're so close. The bank approved us. The inspection went great. Everything's set. We came up a little short on the down payment. The market's crazy right now. They want 20% down to avoid all the extra insurance fees." Tiffany nodded sympathetically, her wide eyes fixed on Martha. "Fees. It's the very last hurdle," she added softly, her voice a delicate whisper. $85,000. That's all that's standing between us and this." She gestured to the perfect house on the tablet. Martha's breath caught in her throat. The number hung in the air, heavy and immense. $85,000 wasn't a little short. It was everything. It was the entirety of David's life insurance policy, a sum she had never touched, and her own meager retirement savings, a nest egg she had guarded fiercely for the unknowns of old age. It was her roof repairs, her property taxes, her emergency fund. It was her security. She looked from the image of the blue-shuttered house to her son's pleading, hopeful face, the same face she had loved and protected his entire life. How could she, his mother, be the one obstacle that stood in his way? The decision gnawed at Martha through a long, sleepless night. She tossed and turned, the number echoing in her mind. $85,000. It was an impossible sum, a fortress of security she was being asked to dismantle. Before dawn, she rose and went to the garage, the air cold and smelling of oil, old wood, and cherished memories. There, under a dusty canvas sheet, sat David's greatest treasure, a 1967 Ford Mustang, cherry red, its chrome trim still winking in the dim light of the single bare bulb. He'd bought it the year Kevin was born, and had spent what felt like thousands of Sundays lovingly polishing its flanks, his hands gentle and sure. They'd taken it on road trips, the wind in their hair, with a young Kevin asleep in the back seat. Selling it felt like a betrayal, like carving out a piece of her own heart and auctioning it off. But as she ran her hand over the cool, curved metal of the fender, she remembered David's words, spoken so many times they were etched into her soul. "Everything I have is for you and the boy, Marty. Everything." This, she reasoned with a logic born of love, was an extension of that promise. Securing her son's future, giving him the foundation for a family, was a legacy David would have been proud to fund. It was what he would have done without a second thought. The man who came to see the car was a kind, older gentleman named Arthur, a retired mechanic with grease still etched into the lines of his hands. He didn't just see a classic car, he saw the history, the love, the countless hours of care. He listened patiently as Martha shared a story or two. His gentle appreciation softened the blow, but when he drove it away, the throaty rumble of its engine fading down the street, the empty space in the garage felt like a physical wound. It was the first piece of her past she had let go. The next day, she walked into the sterile, hushed environment of her local bank. The cool, conditioned air and the quiet clicks of keyboards felt a world away from the emotional turmoil in her heart. She sat across from a young professional man named Mr. Evans, who slid the necessary papers towards her with practiced efficiency. IRA liquidation form, savings account closure. The words on the page were stark, formal, and final. With each scratch of her pen, she felt a layer of her own hard-won security being stripped away. Mr. Evans looked at her over his glasses. "Are you sure about this, Mrs. Henderson? This is a significant withdrawal." She just nodded, forcing a smile. "It's for my son's new house," she said, her voice filled with a conviction she was desperate to feel. "It's a wonderful investment in his future." She walked out with a cashier's check for $85,000 clutched in her hand. The single piece of paper, representing a classic car, a lifetime of work, and a husband's legacy, felt impossibly light. She met Kevin and Tiffany at a trendy coffee shop downtown. When she slid the white envelope across the table, Kevin's performance was worthy of an Oscar. His eyes immediately welled with tears as he pulled her into a tight, clinging embrace, his voice thick with rehearsed emotion. As he pulled her in, "Mom, I don't know what to say. We owe you everything. I swear I'll pay back every single penny with interest." Tiffany, dabbing at her own perfectly dry eyes with a napkin, chimed in. "The master guest room will be the first one we furnish, just for you," she promised, squeezing Martha's arm with surprising strength. "We'll pick out the perfect mattress." Martha felt the pang of loss for the money, for the Mustang, but it was quickly and deliberately overwhelmed by a surge of maternal pride. She had done it. She had given her son his future. As they stood to leave, Kevin turned back one last time, a brilliant 1,000-watt smile on his face. "First Thanksgiving is at our place, Mom. Get ready for it. We'll call you the second the papers are signed." Her heart soared, pushing aside the last vestiges of doubt. She was not just a lonely widow in a quiet house. She was the beloved, generous matriarch of a growing family, the cornerstone of their new life. The first week was filled with the afterglow of her grand gesture. Martha floated through her days, her loneliness temporarily abated by a heady mix of purpose and anticipation. She pictured Kevin and Tiffany at a long wooden table, signing stacks of papers. She imagined them walking through empty rooms, their voices echoing as they planned where the sofa would go, as they debated paint colors for the nursery that would one day be. She didn't want to bother them. They were surely swamped. So she waited, patiently tending her garden and humming to herself. After 10 days, the silence began to feel less like respectful space and more like a void. She sent a carefully worded text. Hope the closing went well. So excited for you both. Let me know if you need any help unpacking. Love you." Hours later, a reply blinked onto her screen from Kevin. "Tax Mom. Closing was yesterday. So hectic. Will call soon." The briefness was understandable, she told herself. Of course they were busy. She felt a surge of relief. The closing was done. It was real. Another week crawled by. The promised call never came. Martha's finger hovered over his contact photo, a picture of him as a grinning 10-year-old with a missing front tooth. Finally, she gave in and called. It rang and rang before clicking over to his generic automated voicemail. "Hi, sweetie, just me. Calling to see how things are. I bet the new place is wonderful. Hope you're not working too hard. Talk to you soon." The silence that followed her message felt heavier this time, more deliberate. She started checking her phone compulsively, her stomach knotting with a familiar, unpleasant tension every time it remained dark and quiet. A neighbor, Mrs. Gable from across the street, saw her checking her mail. "Martha, dear, I heard the wonderful news about Kevin's new house. You must be over the moon." Martha forced a bright smile. "Oh, we are. They're just so busy getting settled. You know how it is." The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. She tried to rationalize it. They were young. They had demanding jobs, a new mortgage, a whole new life to build. She was being a needy old woman clinging to the past. She busied herself with projects. She baked bread she'd have to freeze. She weeded the flower beds with a ferocity that surprised her. But the unease grew from a quiet hum to a dissonant buzz in the back of her mind. A month to the day after she'd given them the check, she sent another text, this one to both Kevin and Tiffany's numbers. "Just wanted to check in. Getting a little worried. Please just let me know you're okay. Love, Mom." She watched the message to Kevin turn from delivered to read. She stared at that little blue word for a full 5 minutes, waiting. And then, nothing. No reply. The digital proof that he had seen her plea for reassurance and had actively chosen to ignore it was a small, sharp pain in her chest, a tiny splinter of ice. She started talking to David's photograph on the mantel again, a habit she'd mostly broken. "He's just busy, right, honey?" she'd ask the smiling, two-dimensional image. "It's a big move. You remember how it was when we bought this place? We didn't talk to anyone for a month." But David's silent, happy gaze offered no comfort, no absolution for the lies she was telling herself. The house felt bigger, emptier than ever before. The steady, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock no longer sounded like the heartbeat of her home, but a countdown to a truth she wasn't ready to face. The joy and pride she had felt had curdled into a cold, creeping dread. Her son, her grateful, tearful son, had vanished behind a wall of impenetrable silence. After another week of unanswered calls and unread texts, the anxiety became a physical presence. It was a tangible thing, a heavy weight in her chest that made it hard to breathe, a constant tightness in her throat. Martha decided she was being foolish, letting her imagination run away with her. She would simply drive over there. She'd bring a housewarming gift, the beautiful hand-quilted blanket she'd been saving for his first home since he was a teenager, and surprise them. The drive would calm her nerves, and seeing them happy in their new home, surrounded by moving boxes, would erase all her silly, unfounded fears. She found the address Kevin had so proudly shown her on the Zillow listing and plugged it into her phone's GPS. The 40-minute drive through the rolling Ohio countryside was a torment of alternating hope and dread. The landscape shifted from familiar, working-class neighborhoods to affluent, sprawling suburbs. With every mile marker, she rehearsed what she would say, practicing a tone of casual surprise. She imagined their faces lighting up, their profuse apologies for being so busy, the warm, reassuring hug that would make everything right again. Maybe their phones were broken. Maybe the cell service was bad in their new neighborhood. Her mind scrambled for innocent explanations. She turned onto the street, a picturesque lane called Oak Street, lined with mature trees and impeccable manicured lawns. And there it was, number 214, the blue-shuttered Colonial, looking even more charming and substantial in person than it had on the tablet screen. A wave of relief washed over her so intensely she felt lightheaded. It was real. She hadn't imagined it. A minivan was parked in the driveway, and 2 small children were chasing a soccer ball in the front yard. their shrieks of laughter echoing in the quiet air. Grandchildren, she thought with a wistful pang. Kevin and Tiffany must be babysitting for a neighbor, already making friends. Clutching the heavy, gift-wrapped blanket, she walked up the stone path to the welcoming front door and rang the bell, a confident smile on her face. The woman who answered was not Tiffany. She was a brunette with kind, dark eyes and a warm, open face, a small toddler clinging to her leg. "Can I help you?" she asked with a friendly, curious smile. Martha's own smile felt suddenly stiff, a foreign object on her face. "Oh, hello. I'm so sorry to bother you. I'm looking for Kevin and Tiffany Henderson. This is their new house. I'm Kevin's mother, Martha." The woman's smile faltered, replaced by a look of genuine, deep confusion. "I'm sorry," she said slowly, her brow furrowed. "I think you must have the wrong address. My name is Anya Rodriguez. My husband and we bought this house a month ago from the Millers, an elderly couple who retired to Arizona." The world tilted on its axis. The air seemed to thin. No, that can't be right," Martha stammered, her voice trembling. "My son, he showed me the listing. He told me the closing was last month. He's moving in." Anya's expression softened with a wave of pity that was almost more painful than outright dismissal. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice gentle. "There must be some terrible mistake. We closed on the house 5 weeks ago. We've been living here ever since. I've never heard of anyone named Henderson." The quilt in Martha's hands suddenly felt impossibly heavy, a fool's offering. The children's laughter from the yard sounded distant and distorted, like sounds from another world. Anya's kind, confused face swam before her eyes. It wasn't a mistake, it was a lie. This perfect house, this perfect future, this entire story had never been real. Martha stumbled back towards her car, her mind a roaring, terrifying void. She managed a choked automatic thank you to the concerned-looking Mrs. Rodriguez before shutting the car door, the sound unnaturally loud in the serene suburban street. She sat there, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white, the beautifully wrapped quilt on the passenger seat a mocking symbol of her own gullible, desperate love. The blue-shuttered house stood before her, no longer a beacon of hope, but a cold monument to an elaborate lie. Her first instinct, primal and fierce, was denial. It had to be a misunderstanding, a colossal clerical error. Maybe Kevin had put an offer on this house, lost it in a bidding war, and bought another one on a different street. Maybe, in the confusion and stress of it all, he hadn't had a chance to update her. The excuses felt thin and pathetic even to her own frantic mind, the last desperate gasps of a dying hope. She scrolled through her phone looking for any clue, any message she might have missed. Then she remembered. In the initial whirlwind of excitement, Tiffany, so proud, had forwarded her the confirmation email from the real estate agent, a Mr. Jim Davies, showing that their offer on 214 Oak Street had been officially accepted. It was their proof of legitimacy. Her hands trembling so badly she could barely control her fingers, Martha scrolled through her old emails until she found it. "Congratulations! The sellers have accepted your offer," the subject line read. His full name, company, and phone number were part of the signature block. With a sense of impending doom, as if she were dialing the number to her own execution, she pressed the call button. A cheerful businesslike voice answered on the second ring. "Jim Davies Realty, this is Jim." Martha's own voice was a reedy, unfamiliar whisper. "Hello, my name is Martha Henderson. I'm calling about a property on Oak Street. A sale to my son, Kevin Henderson." There was a pause on the other end, the faint sound of typing. Henderson. Oh, right. The Colonial at 214 Oak. I remember them." Hope, fragile and utterly irrational, flickered in Martha's chest. "Yes," she said, her voice cracking with relief. "That's the one." Mr. Davies chuckled, a dry, professional sound completely devoid of malice, which somehow made it worse. "Yeah, I remember that one. Nice young couple. They put in an offer, but it was all talk, really. They rescinded it right after the inspection period, claimed they found some issues with the foundation, which was news to us. Never put any real earnest money down, just the initial $1,000 deposit, which they got back. To be honest, ma'am, They seemed like they were just wasting everyone's time. The house sold to a lovely family, the Rodriguezes, a week later for the full asking price. Can I help you with something else today? Martha couldn't speak. The world narrowed to the agent's casual, dismissive words. All talk, wasting everyone's time, never any real money down. The phone slipped from her numb fingers and clattered onto the floor mat. The agent's voice, now tinny and distant, called out, "Ma'am, are you still there?" She didn't answer. The last vestiges of her denial evaporated, burned away by the cold, hard truth. The tearful promises, the talk of a guest room, the emotional hug at the coffee shop, it was all a performance. A carefully scripted and flawlessly executed show designed for one purpose: to get her money. He hadn't just taken her savings. He had taken her love, her trust, her precious memories of David, and twisted them into a weapon against her. The silence in the car was no longer empty. It was filled with the crushing, suffocating weight of an absolute betrayal. Her son had not just disappeared. He had plundered her life and left her for broke. The 40-minute drive home was a blur of tears and highway lights. When Martha walked back into her empty house, the silence she had once found peaceful now felt hostile and suffocating. The ticking clock sounded like a taunt. That night was the longest of her life. She didn't sleep. She sat in David's chair, the worn leather a cold comfort, and stared at the mantelpiece. She looked at the photos of Kevin as a boy, his gap-toothed grin on his first day of school, his awkward teenage face in a football uniform, his proud smile in a college graduation gown. She tried desperately to find the man who had just dismantled her life within the image of the child she had loved beyond measure, but the two wouldn't connect. It was like looking at a stranger. The grief was a physical force, a crushing pressure on her chest, leaving her hollowed out and breathless. She was a victim not just of theft, but of a profound and intimate betrayal that had dynamited the very foundation of her world. But as the first pale gray light of dawn crept through the blinds, something inside her shifted. The sorrow, deep and vast as it was, began to cool. The white-hot grief began to crystallize into something else, a steely, quiet rage. She had wept enough. She had allowed her love to make her a fool, but she would not allow their crime to make her a permanent victim. They had counted on her being too old, too embarrassed, too shattered to fight back. They had miscalculated. David had never raised a victim. He had married a fighter, a woman of quiet but formidable strength. With a newfound, chilling clarity, Martha stood up. She walked to the small desk in the corner of the living room. Her movements were no longer frail, but deliberate and precise. She began, methodically, to build her case. She printed the bank statement showing the $85,000 withdrawal and the image of the cashed cashier's check made out to Kevin. She took screenshots of their entire text message history, from the initial gushing announcement to the final damning silence after she'd read her plea. She found the email from Jim Davies, the real estate agent, and printed that too, his casual words a damning indictment. She gathered every piece of their lie and arranged it all in a neat chronological file. Each piece of paper was a testament not to her gullibility, but to their calculated cruelty. This act of organization was her way of taking back control, of imposing order on the chaos they had created. That afternoon, clutching the manila folder to her chest like a shield, she walked into the local police station. The sterile smell of disinfectant and the indifferent bustle were intimidating, and for a moment, standing under the flickering fluorescent lights, her resolve wavered. The thought of telling a stranger this deeply humiliating story was terrifying. But then she pictured Tiffany's slick, condescending smile and Kevin's phony tears, and her spine straightened into a rod of steel. She walked to the front desk and, in a clear, steady voice, said, "I need to report a crime." She was directed to a small, cluttered office where a man with tired eyes, a rumpled suit, and a patient demeanor introduced himself as Detective Frank Miller. She sat down, took a deep breath, opened her folder, and began to tell her story, her voice gaining strength with every sentence. She wasn't a weeping, broken mother anymore. She was a witness, and she had the evidence. Detective Frank Miller had been a cop for 20 years. He'd seen the worst of humanity: violence, greed, senseless cruelty. But cases of elder fraud, especially those where family preyed on their own, struck a particularly raw nerve. It was a special kind of poison. He listened to Martha's story without interruption, his expression shifting from professional detachment to a grim, focused anger. He examined the documents she presented, his eyes lingering on the text messages. This wasn't just theft, it was predatory. It was a meticulously planned emotional assault. He looked at Martha, at her quiet dignity, and the pain etched around her eyes, and felt a surge of protective fury. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, his voice firm but kind, "I want you to know I'm going to take this very seriously." For the first time in weeks, Martha felt a flicker of something other than despair. She felt hope. He was true to his word. The investigation began with the most obvious and irrefutable trail: the money. A subpoena of Kevin Henderson's bank records was the first crucial step. The documents came back within days and they told a clear story. The day after the $85,000 was deposited, the account lit up with activity. It showed a series of large, sequential cash withdrawals, all for the maximum daily limit, from a string of ATMs. Detective Miller cross-referenced the locations and times. They weren't in Ohio. They were all located within a 2-mile radius on the Las Vegas Strip. "They didn't buy a house, Mrs. Henderson," Miller told her over the phone, his voice tight with controlled rage. "They went on vacation with your life savings." The next step was a wider warrant for more detailed financial records, including Tiffany's credit cards. It painted a sickening, vulgar picture of their betrayal. There were no mortgage payments, no utility bills for a new home. Instead, there were charges for a 5-star luxury condominium rental at a high-rise just off the Strip. Exorbitant bills from high-end restaurants where a single meal cost more than Martha's weekly grocery budget, and thousands of dollars in cash. Advances from the floors of the Bellagio and the MGM Grand. While Martha was sitting at home, worried sick, they were living a life of stolen opulence. The final damning piece of the puzzle came from a place they had been too arrogant and foolish to consider: social media. A subpoena for Tiffany Gable's private Instagram account was a prosecutor's dream. She had documented their entire sordid spree, posting glamorous, filtered pictures of champagne cocktails by a rooftop pool, a collection of newly purchased designer handbags arranged on a hotel bed, and even a short video of Kevin cheering as he threw dice at a craps table. Her captions were a masterclass in oblivious narcissism. "Living our best life, #Vegas baby, and hard work pays off. #couple goals." Armed with ironclad bank records, crisp ATM surveillance photos of Kevin's face, and Tiffany's own self-incriminating digital scrapbook, Detective Miller had everything he needed. He picked up the phone and called the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. He explained the situation, his voice cold and professional as he laid out the details of their con. The Vegas detective on the other end was all too familiar with grifters who came to their city to burn through stolen cash. They quickly identified the condominium complex and, within hours, had obtained a warrant for the arrest of Kevin Henderson and Tiffany Gable on charges of felony theft by deception and financial elder abuse. The net that had been cast in a quiet Ohio police station had stretched 1,700 miles across the country. It was now, finally, closing around them. The end of their fantasy came abruptly and without fanfare. It wasn't in a hail of gunfire or a dramatic chase, but with a firm, insistent knock on the door of their rented pleasure palace. Kevin, hungover and annoyed at the interruption to his late morning, swung the door open, a complaint ready on his lips. He found 2 uniformed LVMPD officers and a plainclothes detective standing in the hallway, their expressions impassive. The look of smug entitlement on his face dissolved into pure, slack-jawed panic. His world, built on a foundation of lies, was collapsing in real time. Tiffany emerged from the bedroom, wrapped in a silk robe, her face a mask of confusion that quickly curdled into terror as a female officer stepped forward and read her Miranda rights. Their lavish lifestyle, paid for with a mother's love and a father's legacy, crumbled around them in the harsh fluorescent light of the condominium hallway. They were cuffed, their wrists bound by cold steel, and led away past the rooftop pool they had boasted about online. They left behind a collection of expensive trinkets they no longer owned and a life that had never been truly theirs. Months later, Martha walked into the imposing county courthouse. She wore a simple, dignified blue dress, her back straight, her expression composed. She was not the broken, weeping woman who had sat in her car outside the wrong house. She was a survivor. Extradited back to Ohio, Kevin and Tiffany looked small and pathetic in their drab prison jumpsuits. Kevin refused to meet her gaze, his eyes fixed on the scuffed floor in front of him, the very picture of pathetic shame. Tiffany just looked pale and angry, glaring at the prosecutor as if this were all some grand inconvenience. Martha felt no desire for revenge, only a profound need for closure, for a final official acknowledgement of the wrong that had been done to her. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for being tough on financial predators, did not hold back. She spoke of the sacred trust between a parent and child, a bond she said they had not just broken, but cynically and cruelly exploited for cheap thrills and gaudy luxuries. She condemned their crime not just for its financial impact, but for its profound moral depravity. When Kevin's lawyer offered a weak plea for leniency, mentioning his client's remorse, the judge looked directly at Kevin. "Your remorse began the moment you were caught, not the moment you cashed your mother's check." When she handed down their sentences, 7 years in state prison for Kevin as the primary architect of the fraud, 5 for Tiffany as an active participant, with mandatory restitution payments to begin upon their release, a quiet gasp went through the courtroom. Martha did not cry. She simply nodded, a slow final acknowledgement. Justice, cold and impartial, had been served. Asset forfeiture managed to recover just over $30,000 of her money, a fraction of what she had lost, but it was enough to provide a small cushion, a fresh start. As she walked out of the courthouse into the bright, clean afternoon sun, Martha felt a profound sense of release. She had lost her son, the idealized, beloved version of him she had held in her heart for so long. She had lost her financial security and a piece of her faith in the world. But in the ashes of that devastating loss, she had discovered a resilience she never knew she possessed. She had faced the ultimate betrayal and had not only survived, but had fought back and won on her own terms. Her future was uncertain, and the scars would always remain, a reminder of what she had endured. But as she looked up at the clear blue sky, she knew one thing for sure: she would rebuild. Alone perhaps, but never again broken.